Hello lovelies, and welcome to my strange little maker nook on YouTube. Now I don't exactly have a lot of subscribers, but on the off chance that you subscribed to my channel for the laser cut woodworking videos and found your way here, this is different. Hi! Welcome to a different, oddly niche maker hobby. This video is going to go over my journey in making my own resin ball-jointed doll. Maybe you'll feel inclined to stick around out of vague curiosity. For anyone else who ended up here thanks to an honest interest or a lovely fluke of the YouTube algorithm, welcome! So long ago, I fell in love with the aesthetic of Asian ball-jointed dolls. But I'm poor and frugal, so I could never justify the expense of buying one. I was a professional 3D character artist, and whenever I made personal character models, I tended to take a lot of inspiration from ball-jointed dolls, but that was just digital. To be able to have one of those physically and in person was a pipe dream, and I didn't think I'd ever achieve that. Back in 2010 or so, I got my very first 3D printer. It was an FDM plastic extrusion type printer, and as much as it was amazing at the time, it's kind of garbage by today's standards. I made several attempts to print a ball-jointed doll back then, but since I had never owned one, I didn't actually know how best to make the joints. I downloaded several different examples off of Thingiverse for those early attempts and heavily referenced their doll joints for how to make my own. But in the end, that never went anywhere and I gave up. Years later, I tried again, going so far as to totally post-process the parts that I printed with 1,000 years of sanding, lots of Bondo and epoxy sculpt, and then making silicone molds and trying to cast the parts in resin. But it was a total failure, not to mention a huge amount of work for utterly subpar results. So I set my 3D files aside and gave up for a while longer. Fast forward to summer of 2021 and my husband surprises me with an Elegoo Saturn photopolymer printer for my birthday. I dug up an earlier attempt at modeling a ball-jointed doll and printed it, and lo and behold, it was awesome! Not the doll, that was a train wreck. The joints were awful. The parts needed a ton of changes to get anywhere close to what I wanted, but the process of going from a 3D model to a finished, usable print was so painless compared to all the trouble that I had gone through before, that it was a breath of fresh air. I was finally able to get a testable prototype in a fast enough turnaround that I could do real iteration and work out what I wanted to fix and how. I had a doll that I could hold in my hands and finally move and adjust and see how the joints really worked in person, and that made a world of difference. So this build diary is starting fairly far along in the process. I'd had so many false starts of trying to record video of the doll making process only for everything to fall apart that I kind of just stopped trying to record things altogether. It only occurred to me to make a video of this when I had finally gotten to the point where I had a done working doll. So instead I'm going to dig through some of my files to demonstrate the process that led me to where I am right now. So I'm actually going to go back to 2 dolls ago. This was the first major project, I guess second major project making a doll, and this one is heavily influenced by some others that I downloaded, like this doll. I can't remember what it's called. You can download this off of Thingiverse. I was using this as reference because I really just did not feel confident in how to make the balls and how to make the joints and all that stuff. So this was a lot of reference. Then, you know, this is me imitating, like, I think this part is literally the exact same. Like, I just snagged the ball and then I did my own things with the torso and used my own models for this. But this was like 2 or 3 dolls ago. And when I printed this guy, I could never get it to stand. She wouldn't stand, and that bothered me. I really wanted to see if I could find a way to make her stand. So in the end, after I'd tried a number of revisions on this thing, I eventually just came to the conclusion that I'd learned a lot. I understood how this stuff was supposed to work. I'd not only messed with the model, but I had 3D printed it and done some revisions, and I felt like I understood a bit better what was going on. I came to the conclusion that what I really wanted to do was start from absolutely nothing. I didn't want to be using any pieces from anyone else's stuff. Like, I didn't like this elbow joint. I really wanted to do it a completely different way, but I felt as long as I had reference in the same file, I kept being tempted to use that reference to just like borrow bits of geometry, just borrow the hip joint or this or that. And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to start with an empty file and start from nothing. And that was this project. So I started with the body that I had made. And I just started cutting in where I wanted the various joints and things. And this is file 01. I made a lot of changes after this. Like, this knee did not work at all. I remodeled this knee like 4 or 5 times before I got one that I liked. The elbow worked pretty well, pretty much from the get-go. Like, I think the elbow turned out really good. This was a part that I didn't take into account very well. This arm would not go down very far. So here you can see what I had to change there, because if I didn't, I couldn't move the arm down. It was like she was stuck in like C-3PO mode. She always had to stand around looking like C-3PO with her arms sticking out like, yeah, and that, you know, that bothered me, obviously, for reasons that I think are reasonable. I had changed the hip area quite a bit. I had to tweak this and this. This right here was the most recent significant change. So I had printed the entire doll with the previous style hips. I think the last file might have the previous style hips. Let me see, go back to that one. Yeah, see how it's all just one part? So this was the way I did the hip, the upper leg first. It was all just one thing. Because I wanted her to be able to stand. And that bean joint that you saw in the old attempt, my first attempt where I was copying other people's doll joint types, with that bean, she's just so flimsy she'd flop over. It was totally impossible to make her stand. It was good for posing, but not for standing. And I really wanted a doll that could stand. So I went on to Reddit, onto the Ball Jointed Doll subreddit, and asked, I kind of ran a poll, like, what is your favorite kind of hip joint? And this really lovely lady replied and offered to make a video where she went through all of her dolls, the different types of joints that her dolls had, and demonstrated them. And it's on YouTube, and I'll see if I can find a link to it, and I'll stick it somewhere so you can actually see that. But that was great. One of her dolls had a joint like this, so that it could hook on itself. Because that's what this does. It's this sort of thing. And when I saw that, I liked it. I was like, I like that. Because when you have it in here, it's really snug and it stays as a single unit. It feels like a single unit. I even sand them as a single unit and it just turns out great. But if you need more articulation, you just pull it out and bend it over, and you've got yourself what functionally works the way the stupid bean does, but she can actually stand. So that was, I think, probably the third version of her hip was when I finally got to this point, and that was after lovely lady made her video with a demonstration, and I was like, yes, that's what I want. That's what I want to do. So, and I also put this in. I'm still not confident it even does any good. It's so small. I think I might have to scale it up if I actually want it to do anything. But that was another thing. One of her dolls had like a nub so that it could kind of catch in there and it would hold it upright a little bit better. Okay, that's the way her hips are standing right now. Yeah, this is the latest version. So in this version, I redid the knee again. I didn't have the ball going deep enough into the knee before. That was what my biggest problem was. And so it wouldn't hold itself. It just always wanted to slip. It always wanted to move. This is my latest thing. I have recorded this part. I will edit that into the next piece. This is the new hands. The old hands are these. This is the old hand. It was perfectly fine. I was satisfied leaving it with just these hands. I wasn't going to do anything different. Except then I started thinking about like well, maybe I could do different posed versions of the hand, and then I'll just have that. But you know what you have to do then? You have to unhook it and hook on the new hand every single time you want to change the hand pose. And that's kind of a nuisance. And then I saw someone doing an unboxing of some ball jointed doll on YouTube, and that doll had magnet hands. Where they had little magnets, and this is the part that actually hooks in, you know, with your S hook. So it's literally just this and a magnet. And this is the part that hooks in, and then these can just pop in, and you can change the hand pose. It also, you know, would probably make it a lot easier to dress the doll if you're not having to worry about trying to put clothes over, you know, a big open hand or whatever. So I was like, well, shoot, I think I want to do that. I think maybe I do want to do that. Like I said, I actually recorded that part. I recorded myself doing that part. So I will go ahead and edit that in right here. So to make these hands, I actually opened up a totally unrelated model that I had already had rigged for a different project. This character is actually something that I made for a friend's indie game. So it's got boning and skinning already done and set up, and therefore I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. So I put the hands into several different poses: a fist, a holding hand, a peace sign, and a sort of relaxed pose. Then I just duplicated and froze the hand geometry for each of these poses and exported those back into my master doll file. Here I'm making the part that will actually connect to the rest of the doll, as well as making the slot for the magnets and the base geometry so that the hands can slot into the wrists. This slot is actually way too shallow, which I won't learn until later when I've actually printed these and tried them out. I will fix this in a later revision. Finally, I got to the point where I had 4 posed hands that were done, but as you may notice, they have this sort of rubber hose hot dog finger thing going on, so I wanted to do a sculpting pass. I took the 4 hands into ZBrush and went through the process of sculpting in details into each of the 4 hands. Now obviously I'm using some of the more professional level 3D packages here because that's what I learned in school, it's what I used when I worked professionally in video games, and it's what I've been using for the last 20 years. But that doesn't mean that if you are wanting to get into 3D modeling and print your own doll, that you need to use these specific packages. I use Maya for the bulk of my modeling and I use ZBrush for sculpting, but both of these are very, very expensive, and if you're doing this as a hobby, they're really not worth the investment. However, there is a package called Blender, and you can actually use that one for free. From what I've seen, it's actually really impressive, and it's got some really good sculpting tools in the latest revisions. I'll confess that I have never bothered to learn Blender, but I've certainly heard plenty of very good things. The best probably being that it's free. Here are the hands that I exported out of Maya, which are very rubber hosey and kind of crappy. And here's literally the same mesh. I didn't even add in geometry. I just took these into ZBrush and sculpted them. But yeah, here they are, back from ZBrush with a lot better definition. And let's turn that off. Yeah, see? So yeah. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these into my slicer, which is Chidu Box, for my printer, and place them and create supports. So that's next. Alright, and here we are with all of the support materials. And it's the right and left hands, so that's why there's so many extra hands all of a sudden. And this is my printer. It is an Elegoo Saturn, which is the middle-sized one that they've got. The Mars, I believe, is the smaller one, and they recently came out with a Jupiter, which is even bigger, so that's, you know, a big thing. This one, I think, is just right, you know, it's Goldilocks. So I already got the file on. Hands, there we go. And now that will move down into the vat of resin. All right, so there it goes. Down into the resin. Presses on, and right now, there we go. That is what the screen is projecting at this moment. And while it does that, the resin in those specific spots pressed against that bed is being cured. So that is getting cured into the space between the big metal bed and the FEP film. And then after it has sufficiently cured, it will pull up, and the FEP film is flexible, so it gets pulled and then pop, and the stuff pops right off of it. It comes up, and then it goes right back down, and it does the next layer. And then holds that for a few seconds, and then starts to go up, pulls it off the FEP film, goes back down, does the next layer. So that is why it says this is going to take 2.5 hours for these hands. So 2.5 hours, and I'll see you again. Okay, it has been 2.5 hours. Well, maybe a little bit more than 2.5 hours. Let's get up close. It looks like everything's come out good. Yeah, those are looking pretty good. Alright, so I'm going to pause and finish removing these and cleaning them off, and then we will resume to the next stage. Alright, I got all the pieces off of the platform. Obviously they're still on their support materials, but now I'm going to rinse them off. I have got one of these guys. It's an Elegoo Mercury, and so spinny. Alright, they've been rinsed, and now I've swapped out the jug for this little plate, and it's got magnets on the bottom. So the little spinning magnet that was responsible for making the mixing thing spin will now be responsible for making this spin. So this one machine can both wash and cure, so it's quite snazzy. Alright, I've got all of the support materials off, and here's one of them. It's a little bit too snug. I mean, I got it in there, and obviously it's staying together without a magnet at the moment, so friction fit, yes, but I'm gonna need to make the gap in there a little bit bigger. It's just a little bit too snug. But, yeah, and this is what they look like, and I haven't sanded anything yet. You can see the little divots from where the support material was. But, and this side looks great. It's all the detail. You can see where the supports were. You've got the end that attaches to the arm, and I've got little magnets in them, and they latch right onto the hands, so that's great. Things fit well. Probably could be a bit more of a flush fit, but it is what it is. I've done some sanding. There's a hand for holding something. These guys, it's just a fist. But yeah, I think these came out pretty good. First experiment using them. Let's see. I would definitely say it's harder to pose just because they just want to come off. I mean, they'll stay in place as soon as they're there, but you try and adjust the position and it's like, hi, I'm gonna come off. So at this point, I decided to print another whole doll, but in a more warm ivory beigey skin tone resin that I've got. I exported all of the parts and managed to get every single part of the doll on the print bed for a single 7-hour print. I didn't include the magnet hands and instead modified my previous hands with the relaxed hand sculpt from the newer batch. I still need to prototype the magnet hand connection a bit more. I rinsed off the parts and then cured them in batches. Then it was time for the oh-so-tedious process of trimming off the support material. In some cases, the supports can just be twisted and pulled off, but that runs the risk of leaving divots in the resin, so I find it a bit safer to just clip the supports manually. As much as trimming off the supports seems tedious, sanding is much, much worse. I start with a rougher sandpaper around 150 grit, but I only use that on the areas that have lots of bumps from the supports. After I've got those mostly removed, I move on to 220 grit sandpaper, and I'll often go over the entire part with that. After that, I'll use 400 grit sandpaper, and I often get that wet with water. I go over every single piece doing this. If I'm feeling up to it, I'll also go over all of the parts with my micro mesh pads. Here you can see how I sand the two parts of the upper leg as a single piece. Since the top part slots into the lower part really well, I just hold them together and sand them like that. This ensures that there's a smooth transition between the two parts without any obvious lumpy bits showing off where one part ends and the other one starts. Here you can see the difference between a foot that I sanded and one that I haven't. And finally, on to stringing the doll. I definitely do not claim to be an expert on how this is done. I'm pretty much just doing what I managed to work out on my own from trial and error. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up the stringing. And here she is. She sits, she moves, she poses, she holds her pose. It's awesome. Anyway, she stands! Woohoo! Now, do I think that she could stand on her own if she had wig and clothes on? Probably not, but whatever. Honestly, most people I've asked online said that standing isn't even that important to them, as actually getting their dolls to stand most of the time is pretty iffy, and they tend to just use stands anyways. But I can get her to stand, so I'm pleased. So here we are at the end. Here's some of her general measurements. Technically, I could print her at different scales, but this is sort of my ideal scale, personally. Obviously, it doesn't exactly fit into any of the standard ball-jointed doll sizes. Coming in at 30 centimeters in height puts her below even the YoSD size. But I do see a fair number of art dolls that come in around 30 centimeters, so it doesn't seem that unusual. I really love both how poseable she is and how well she holds a pose. I haven't tried any clothing yet because honestly I don't have any doll clothing lying around, so it's not like I could test out different things to see if any of the standard sizes actually fit her. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's been quite a journey for me, with many starts and many stops, and I'm super happy to finally have gotten an end product that I am happy with and proud of. I'm going to be offering her on my Etsy shop, even though she doesn't fit with the rest of my products at all. I'm thinking of offering her in two forms, like this, where I've done all of this cleanup and sanding and stringing, but also in a garage kit form for anyone who's willing to go through all of that cleanup and post-processing themselves in exchange for a big discount. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, I'd super duper appreciate a thumbs up to appease the algorithm gods, and a comment to up the engagement would apparently help as well. If you know anyone else who would enjoy this or be interested, a share would help me endlessly. I do hope you have a beautiful day, and don't forget to be awesome. Bye-bye!